Captain sat in the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, the early morning sun casting a golden shimmer across the desert landscape far below. Her gloved hands rested on the controls with the confidence of a pilot who had spent countless hours navigating these skis. To anyone observing, this was just another patrol, a routine mission over a tense border region where threats were rare, but the tension was ever present. Squadron had flown this sector many times, but she had learned long ago that the air is rarely truly predictable. She performed the final pre-flight checks with meticulous precision, scanning every instrument, every gauge, and every warning light. The hum of the engines vibrated through her seat, a familiar rhythm that had become almost meditative over the years. "All systems nominal," she murmured, her voice calm but focused. Her wingman, Lieutenant Mark Davis, mirrored her movements in the next aircraft, a silent camaraderie passing between them that needed no words. The air was crisp, almost serene, yet there was a faint undertone of tension that couldn't shake. Border patrols often felt uneventful, a series of repeated routines: navigation, visual reconnaissance, radio check-ins, and returning to base. Today, she thought, would be no different. She relished the quiet moments of flying, the way the clouds moved like rivers above the rugged terrain, and the way the sunlight bounced off the aircraft's wings in dazzling flashes. Yet even as she settled into the familiar rhythm of her patrol, subtle signs hinted that this flight would not remain ordinary. Her radar briefly flickered with anomalies she couldn't immediately identify, faint blips that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Frowned, adjusting the display and recalibrating the sensors. "Probably just interference," she muttered to herself. Still, a knot of unease formed in her stomach, a feeling she had learned to trust over years of flying in high-stakes situations. As the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, his mind wandered briefly to the routine aspects of life on base. The cafeteria breakfast, the friendly banter with mechanics, the careful planning that went into each mission. In these moments, flying was almost comforting, a predictable dance against the backdrop of the sky. The hum of engines, the subtle vibrations through the cockpit, and the synchronized maneuvers with her squadron gave her a sense of control in a world that often felt unpredictable. She glanced at the horizon, watching the mountains rise in jagged formations, the desert floor dotted with outposts and patrol markers. Below, the earth seemed calm, yet she knew the line between peace and danger was thin. Instincts, honed over years of missions, told her that no patrol was ever truly routine, even if it felt that way. Her heart rate remained steady, but she felt the subtle thrill of anticipation, the silent promise that something, somehow, could disrupt the ordinary. As she radioed a routine check-in with Air Operations Command, noticed a flicker of movement on the radar, a trace too small to identify, yet persistent. Her training kicked in instantly. She tracked the blip, cross-referenced with flight data, and ran through every standard protocol. Her wingman noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the way she tightened her grip slightly on the controls. "Everything all right?" Mark asked over the comms, his voice calm, masking his own curiosity. Responded with a practiced smile, though she couldn't entirely hide the edge in her tone. "All systems normal, just keeping an eye on a minor anomaly." But in the back of her mind, she felt the first stirrings of something larger, something beyond the routine patrol. Unseen, the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Didn't yet know that in a matter of minutes, her name would appear on every screen, her call sign would echo across the command center, and a series of events would unfold that would turn this ordinary morning into a moment of extraordinary significance. For now, though, she focused on the familiar, the hum of engines, the endless expanse of sky, and the calm certainty of routine. But deep down, sensed that today, the sky held more than just clouds and sunlight. It held the first whispers of an unprecedented event, one that would test her skill, her judgment, and her courage in ways she had never imagined. The hum of the A-10s engines was almost hypnotic, a constant companion as Captain scanned the terrain below. Mountains stretched like jagged teeth along the horizon, and desert plains shimmered in the early morning sun. She adjusted her visor, squinting at the distant ridges, when a sudden crackle interrupted the routine chatter in her headset. "Do you copy?" Froze, that voice, or rather the call sign, was unmistakably hers. She frowned, twisting her head to glance at Lieutenant Mark Davis in the wingman's seat beside her. He mirrored her confusion, brows furrowed beneath his helmet. "That's weird," he muttered over the comms. Pressed her fingers to the headset. "This is reading you, go ahead." The transmission came again, distorted and urgent, but not in any familiar code she recognized. "All units hold, repeat, all units hold, is initiating Protocol Delta. Confirmed." Pulse quickened. Protocol Delta. She had heard the term in classified briefings long ago, a theoretical override used in extreme scenarios, but it had never been activated in the field, not in her career, not anywhere. And yet her name had triggered it. Her call sign was no longer just an identifier, it was a catalyst. Mark's voice broke through her thoughts. "Is that?" "I don't know," she admitted, her fingers tightening around the controls. Her instincts screamed that this was not a glitch or a routine drill. Something, somewhere, had recognized her call sign as a trigger. The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine. She scanned the sky, adjusting the radar to search for anomalies. The usual patterns of air traffic, border patrol drones, and other aircraft looked normal, but the data she received from command was anything but. Squadrons in the sector had frozen mid-flight, as if invisible hands had held their aircraft in place. Blinked. Surely, she hadn't misread the instruments. Yet the visual confirmations were unmistakable. The A-10s hovering above the desert were perfectly still. Her heart thudded in her chest. A routine patrol had transformed into a moment of unprecedented responsibility, and the weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. Had spent years training for combat, reconnaissance, and crisis management, but nothing had prepared her for being the trigger for a live, mid-air command that froze an entire fleet. "Command, can you clarify?" His voice was steady, though the underlying tension was palpable. "I don't understand what I've just triggered." Static crackled, then a calm, controlled voice came through, deliberately vague. "All information cannot be disclosed over open channels. Maintain your patrol. Proceed with caution. Delta is active." Exhaled slowly. Caution was an understatement. Every decision she made now had implications far beyond the routine reconnaissance mission she had been expecting. Her mind raced through scenarios: accidental escalation, border incidents, diplomatic fallout. The desert below had never seemed so alive with potential danger, every shadow a possible threat, every movement amplified by her sudden, unseen authority. Mark leaned closer. "I don't like this, something's not right." She nodded, forcing calm into her movements. "I know, but panicking won't help. We keep our formation, keep scanning, and follow protocol. We don't know what Delta fully entails yet." Despite her outward composure, a flutter of unease danced in her stomach. Her routine patrol was gone, replaced by a mission she didn't ask for but had to execute flawlessly. As she adjusted her altitude and maintained visual contact with the frozen A-10s above, realized that she was no longer just a pilot on a familiar route. She was the center of an invisible mechanism, the pivot upon which lives, machinery, and potentially even international relations now balanced. And somewhere deep in the command network, thousands of eyes were watching, waiting to see what she would do next. Fingers tightened on the throttle. This was no ordinary patrol anymore. Today, the sky itself was holding its breath, and she unknowingly had become the reason. The sky, once a calm expanse of pale blue, suddenly felt heavy with tension. Captain squinted against the sunlight glinting off her A-10's canopy. Ahead, the other squadron's aircraft, massive and lethal, were suspended midair, engines roaring but wings frozen as though held by invisible strings. Pilots radioed confusion, voices layered with disbelief. Pulse surged. This was no drill, no technical glitch. Something unprecedented was unfolding, and her call sign was at the center of it. Lieutenant Mark Davis mirrored her astonishment. Are they?" She nodded, gripping the throttle. They're frozen, all of them. I think it's the protocol." The sheer magnitude of the moment hit her. These A-10 warthogs were instruments of war, designed for relentless precision in combat. Yet here they were, suspended like statues above the desert, silent except for the low hum of engines and the occasional static crackle from radio channels. Below, ground forces paused, scanning the sky, their eyes tracing the frozen giants hovering in formation. Felt a shiver of responsibility. Every second that passed, every decision she didn't make, could tip the balance between safety and catastrophe. The protocol she had inadvertently triggered, Delta, was designed to freeze escalation instantly, but now she understood its full weight. One wrong move, one miscalculated maneuver, and the consequences could ripple far beyond the border. She adjusted her radar, trying to make sense of the frozen formation. The pilots in the hovering A-10s were still alive, still in control of their aircraft, yet powerless to move. Their engines screamed against the invisible leash of the protocol, and imagine the tension in their cockpits, the anxiety of flying war machines with motion halted by unseen forces. "Command," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her. "I'm seeing the hold on multiple units. Can you clarify what I'm supposed to do next?" Static answered her, followed by a calm, deliberate voice. "Delta is active. Maintain position. Do not engage. All units under Delta will remain frozen until further notice. You are the focal point." His mind raced. She was the pivot, the fulcrum on which an entire aerial theater balanced. Every instinct told her to act, to maneuver, to investigate, yet the protocol demanded patience. She realized the strange duality of her position, powerful yet constrained, central yet helpless in terms of direct intervention. Mark leaned closer. This is insane. We're literally the calm in the middle of chaos." Didn't reply immediately. Her eyes scanned the horizon, mapping every ridge, every outpost, every shadow that could conceal movement. Beneath the frozen jets, the desert seemed deceptively calm, but she knew that danger rarely waited for the ordinary. Delta had prevented a potentially explosive situation, but now she had to hold the balance, ensuring no accidental engagement occurred. Suddenly, a faint movement on the radar caught her attention. Ground forces in the sector shifting, vehicles moving toward areas of interest. Her stomach tightened. Any misstep from her, any unintended input, could cascade into disaster. She felt the enormous responsibility settling over her shoulders like the weight of the sky itself. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Above her, the A-10s remained motionless, giant machines of destruction paused mid-flight, as if the air itself had frozen. Breath slowly, counting each second, maintaining focus, aware that the fate of dozens of pilots, ground forces, and the mission itself rested entirely on her composure and judgment. In that surreal moment, understood something profound. This was no longer a patrol. She wasn't merely a pilot navigating familiar skis. She had become a guardian of controlled chaos, the living trigger of a protocol designed to prevent disaster, and the responsibility of that realization pressed upon her with stunning clarity. The sky was silent but alive, and she was at its center. Back at Air Operations Command, the atmosphere was tense, almost electric. Screens flashed red and amber, displaying the mid-air pause of the A-10s. Analysts and officers scrolled through data streams, cross-checking every signal, every transmission. Nobody had ever seen Delta activated in the field, and the sudden freeze of multiple squadrons had thrown the command center into controlled chaos. Lieutenant Colonel James Harper's flight commander leaned over a console, eyes narrowed at the data. He muttered, almost to himself. Her call sign triggered the protocol, but why? Nothing should have prompted Delta this far south. Technicians scrambled to verify communication logs, radar feeds, and encrypted transmissions. Every signal pointed to the same conclusion. The protocol had activated because of her call sign, not an external threat. His name had become the pivot of the operation, and the control room felt the weight of that fact. "Is she aware?" an intelligence officer asked, voice tense. "Does she know she's holding the A-10s in midair?" "Not fully," Harper replied, running a hand through his hair. "She's trained for emergencies, but this is unprecedented. She's flying blind, and yet she's the key to keeping the situation from escalating." Miles above the desert maintained her patrol, unaware of the storm of activity on the ground. Yet as minutes passed, fragments of information filtered through her headset, cryptic instructions, confirmations of Delta activation, and warnings to proceed with extreme caution. Her mind raced, analyzing the implications. Every maneuver she made, every observation she relayed had ripple effects far beyond the patrol. Flashbacks to her past missions surfaced, deployments over volatile regions, near misses with rogue aircraft, and tense engagements where seconds could decide life or death. She had faced high-pressure scenarios before, but none had given her control over an entire aerial theater without warning. The thought was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Harper called in a communication officer. "Get me on a secure channel. I need her calm, but she must understand the scope of what's happening." His voice came through, steady, professional. "Command, reading. I understand the hold is active, but I need clarification. What's the exact objective?" Static crackled before Harper spoke. "Delta is active. You are the pivot. All units remain frozen to prevent escalation. You maintain observation and situational awareness. No action is required unless further orders are transmitted. This is extraordinary. Maintain composure." Stomach tightened. Extraordinary barely captured it. She felt the enormous weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest, yet she forced herself to breathe slowly, to focus on the mission she had trained for her entire career. One misstep could have unintended consequences. She scanned the horizon, absorbing every detail, her eyes tracing shadows, movement, and terrain. Mark's voice broke her focus, soft but tense. "I feel like we're caught in a surreal freeze frame. What happens if we move?" Didn't answer immediately. She understood the gravity. The moment demanded restraint. "We don't move," she said finally, tone calm, commanding. "Delta is holding them. Our job is to watch, observe, and report. Nothing more, nothing less." Below in the command center, the team pieced together the anomaly, tracing every command line and protocol link. They marveled at the precision and thoughtfulness of Delta, a design to prevent catastrophe, triggered unexpectedly by a single pilot on patrol. Was at the center of this invisible web of control, the guardian of mid-air calm. In the sky, kept flying, focused and alert, unaware of just how unique her situation was. Every decision, every observation was now part of a silent ballet, a carefully orchestrated pause in military operations. The A-10s remained statuesque above the desert. The ground forces held in suspense and understood something vital. Her routine mission had been transformed into an extraordinary test of composure, judgment, and responsibility. Captain adjusted her visor and squinted at the terrain below, the desert stretching endlessly, deceptively calm. Her hands gripped the controls of the A-10 as she monitored every movement, aware that above her, the frozen jets hung like massive guardians in the sky, held in perfect suspension by the Delta Protocol. Ground forces in the sector began reporting subtle, unusual activity, vehicles shifting along dirt roads, shadows moving along ridges. His pulse quickened. Any misstep now could escalate a situation she barely understood. Lieutenant Mark Davis, glancing at her, broke the tense silence. "We're literally the calm in the middle of chaos. This is insane." Nodded jaw tight. "I know, but we have to stay sharp. One wrong move could trigger everything. We observe, we report, we maintain formation. That's it." Her eyes scanned the horizon, noting every ridge, every outpost, every glint that could signal movement. The desert below seemed serene, but had learned long ago that appearances were deceiving. The slightest miscalculation could cause civilian casualties, provoke enemy engagement, or unintentionally violate airspace protocols. She was acutely aware that every second she remained airborne, decisions hung in the balance, a delicate tension between safety and disaster. From the command center, cryptic updates filtered through her headset, confirming her observations but providing little actionable detail. Delta had frozen the A-10s, yes, but it did not absolve her of responsibility. She needed to maintain situational awareness and prevent escalation, all while holding steady in the sky, knowing that one misstep could ripple far beyond the desert below. Her mind raced. She recalled previous missions, the adrenaline-fueled decisions, the tactical maneuvers, and the split-second thinking that saved lives. But this was different. Here, she held a power she hadn't earned or expected, the authority to control mid-air assets that could decide life or death for countless people. The weight pressed against her chest, but her training kept her steady. Suddenly, her radar flickered with subtle movement, vehicles approaching a sensitive area along the border. Stomach tightened. Even though the A-10s were frozen, ground forces were active, and any escalation could be disastrous. She adjusted her flight path slightly to maintain optimal observation angles, scanning for threats, noting everything for immediate reporting. Mark leaned closer. "This feels like a test we didn't sign up for. What if someone misreads our intent?" Exhaled slowly. "Then we do exactly what we've been doing. Stay calm, keep watching, and never act impulsively." Delta froze the A-10s to prevent escalation. We're the eyes, nothing more, nothing less. She imagined the pilots in the frozen jets, trapped midair yet alive, engines roaring against the invisible restraint. She empathized with them, understanding the tension of holding still while the world beneath moved unpredictably. The surreal sight of the hovering aircraft reminded her of the extraordinary responsibility she now carried. She was the fulcrum of a delicate balance between calm and chaos. Minutes stretched like hours. Focus never wavered. Her heart remained steady, her hands precise. She relayed observations meticulously, every convoy, every movement of personnel, every subtle shift in terrain. The Delta Protocol had frozen mid-air firepower, but she had frozen herself in focus, understanding that the mission now required patience as much as skill, observation as much as action. Finally, a faint crackle in the headset brought her attention back to command. "Maintain position. Monitor movement. No escalation. You are the pivot." Nodded almost to herself. She understood now that courage wasn't always about bullets and engines. Sometimes it was about restraint, observation, and the steady hand in the cockpit that prevented disaster. The sky was tense, the desert below deceptive, and she was its silent guardian. Today, an ordinary patrol had become a lesson in patience, judgment, and the immense responsibility of unseen authority. Captain fingers hovered over the controls, the hum of her A-10s engines a constant reminder of the power she wielded, yet could not fully control. The frozen jets above the desert remained statuesque, massive predators suspended mid-flight. Below, the terrain rippled with subtle movements of ground forces, shadows shifting along ridges, vehicles inching forward. Every second stretched with the tension of an unseen heartbeat. His mind raced, trying to understand why her ordinary patrol had become the linchpin of a frozen aerial theater. Then came the clarification over the secure channel, crisp and deliberate. Delta is a ceasefire override protocol. It freezes all active units in high-risk scenarios to prevent unintended engagement. You are the pivot. Your call sign initiated the activation. Maintain vigilance. His breath caught. Delta. She had known of it theoretically, for extraordinary circumstances, but had never imagined she would be its trigger. Her call sign, the routine identifier she had carried through years of training and missions, had suddenly become the key to preventing potential catastrophe. She was not merely flying a patrol, she was maintaining balance across a theater of active military operations. Mark, her wingman, glanced nervously at her. "So, all those jets froze in midair because of you?" Nodded, her jaw tight. "Apparently. Delta only triggers under extreme conditions, My patrol apparently qualified somehow. She felt a mixture of awe and incredulity. The scale of responsibility was staggering. These pilots, these machines, even the movement of ground forces, they were all paused in response to her presence, her routine identification in the sky. She reflected on the implications. One wrong word, one misjudged maneuver, one impulsive action could have undone the delicate balance Delta had imposed. The protocol was designed to prevent escalation, to freeze war machines when seconds mattered and lives hung in the balance. And she, a single pilot on a seemingly routine mission, had become the guardian of that freeze. Below, the desert remained deceptively calm, but trained eyes saw the potential for chaos. Vehicles had stopped, personnel froze mid-step, and the frozen jets hovered like silent sentinels, engines growling yet motionless. She understood suddenly that her role was not to act aggressively, but to restrain, to observe, and to maintain composure, letting the invisible protocol handle the pause. Her ordinary patrol had transformed into something extraordinary. She was a living. Mark's voice broke her contemplation. It's surreal. I've never felt so powerless and responsible at the same time. Allowed a small, grim smile. That's the point. Delta is about restraint, about preventing disaster. We're here to watch, report, and do nothing else. She felt a quiet thrill, tempered by the gravity of the moment. Her call sign, once merely a label, had become a lever that could control life, war, and diplomacy. Minutes ticked by, each one a test of patience and focus. Relayed subtle observations, convoys approaching, personnel movements, minor shifts in terrain. Each report confirmed that Delta was working as intended, holding potential conflict at bay. She realized that courage was not always about bold maneuvers or dogfights. Sometimes it was about silence, restraint, and precise observation. For the first time, fully grasped the significance of her presence in the sky. She was not just a pilot. She was a guardian of order, the silent pivot preventing the escalation of tension into catastrophe. The Delta Protocol had chosen her, and she had risen to the unexpected responsibility, combining skill, calm, and awareness to navigate a situation that few in history had ever encountered. As she scanned the horizon, felt a profound connection to the forces above and below her. The sky held its breath, the desert below remained still, and she understood a truth that would stay with her forever. Sometimes, being extraordinary was not about taking action. It was about knowing when to hold the world steady, even when it feels like it could fall apart at any moment. The A-10s finally descended toward the base, engines settling into their familiar rhythmic hum. Captain guided her aircraft through the approach, eyes scanning every movement of the landing strip, every shadow in the desert dust. The Delta Protocol had held the sky in suspended animation long enough to prevent escalation, but now, as the frozen jets gradually resumed normal flight, felt the immense weight of what had just occurred. This routine patrol had transformed into a historical moment of unseen heroism. Lieutenant Mark Davis exhaled slowly beside her, breaking the tension. I don't think I'll ever forget that, floating above those A-10s, knowing nothing could move unreal. Allowed herself a small, wry smile. Yeah, unsettling, isn't it? But necessary. That's what Delta was designed for. She could feel the adrenaline fatting, replaced by a reflective calm. The sky that had held such tension now seemed ordinary again, yet she knew nothing about this mission would ever feel ordinary to her. The squadron touched down, wheels rolling over tarmac, engines winding down. Mechanics and ground crews moved with efficiency, unaware of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded above them. Flight Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harper, met her at the base apron, eyes narrowed, brows furrowed with both concern and admiration. "You did well up there," Harper said, his voice a mix of relief and respect. "I don't think anyone fully realizes what happened until they see the logs. Delta activated, all units frozen, and you were the trigger. Incredible." Nodded, exhaustion and pride mingling. She had trained for years to respond under pressure, to manage crisis situations. Yet nothing in her career had prepared her for being the living focal point of a ceasefire override. Her call sign had become more than a designation. It had been a lever capable of holding mid-air war machines in suspended tension. The debriefing room buzzed with conversation, analysts poring over data, commanders reviewing every second of flight logs. Recounted her actions calmly, emphasizing restraint, observation, and situational awareness. She spoke of the surreal sight of frozen A-10s, of maintaining focus while aware that every second had implications far beyond the desert below. Her tone was professional, but beneath it was the quiet awe of someone who had witnessed something unprecedented. Mark joined her later, shaking his head. "I still can't wrap my mind around it. We weren't just flying, we were holding a moment of history." His eyes softened as she glanced toward the sky, now clear and calm, sunlight bouncing off the wings of the returning jets. "It's strange, isn't it? That being extraordinary isn't always about action. Sometimes it's about holding still, letting things unfold, and keeping everything from falling apart." She walked among her fellow pilots and crews, the familiar sounds of the base grounding her after the surreal events in the sky. Conversations buzzed quietly, but's mind lingered on the broader implications: the Delta Protocol, the frozen jets, and the invisible chain of responsibility that had transformed a routine patrol into a pivotal moment. She reflected on the thin line between routine and extraordinary, the unseen safeguards that protected countless lives without anyone ever noticing. Later, alone in the quiet of the hangar, allowed herself a moment of contemplation. The weight of responsibility, the unseen hand of Delta, and the surreal beauty of frozen jets above the desert remained vivid in her mind. She realized that courage sometimes came not in bursts of action, but in calm, measured judgment and unwavering focus. The sky, for her, had become a canvas of patience, vigilance, and extraordinary restraint. Captain understood, perhaps more than anyone in her squadron, that heroes weren't always visible. Sometimes, they were the ones holding the balance in moments where the world itself seemed poised on the edge of chaos. Today, she had become one of those unseen guardians, and the lesson would stay with her for the rest of her life. Captain walked along the tarmac, the desert sun casting long shadows from the grounded A-10s behind her. The adrenaline from the mission had ebbed, leaving a calm, almost reverent clarity. Today, a routine patrol had transformed into something historic, something that would be whispered about in briefings, celebrated quietly in corridors, and studied in future training sessions. She had been the pivot of Delta, the unseen hand that had held lethal power suspended above the earth. Lieutenant Mark Davis trailed her, still in awe. "I keep thinking about it, frozen jets midair, and we're just floating there, watching. It's like we were holding the world steady." Allowed herself a small smile. "We were, and we did it without firing a single shot." The weight of restraint, of patience, felt heavier than any combat she had endured. She understood now that sometimes the greatest courage was in what you didn't do. Back in the command center, analysts were poring over flight logs, mission reports, and radar feeds. Delta had been executed flawlessly, and the data confirmed the near-impossible scenario. Captain Call Sign had triggered a ceasefire override, freezing multiple squadrons in midair, preventing accidental escalation along a tense international border. The significance of her actions rippled through the ranks quietly but profoundly. Reflected on the surreal tableau in the sky, the A-10s, engines roaring but motionless, hovering like giants over the desert. She imagined the pilots' eyes tense but trained, trusting that the invisible protocol would protect them. And it had. The moment had required no heroics in the conventional sense, only discipline, composure, and vigilance. In that sense, she had been a guardian, a silent sentinel maintaining balance in a fragile world. Word of her extraordinary patrol spread through the Air Force quietly. Within military circles, the tale became known as the day the A-10s froze. Its call sign, once just a simple identifier, was now a symbol of vigilance, discipline, and the invisible mechanisms that protect life. Pilots recounted the story with awe, each retelling emphasizing the power of restraint, focus, and situational awareness. Yet for the story remained personal. The mission had revealed a truth she could never unlearn. Heroism is often invisible, quiet, and unseen. It isn't always measured in dogfights or strategic strikes. It's measured in moments where one's judgment, composure, and awareness prevent catastrophe before it can happen. She walked past the returning jets, touching the fuselage of her lightly. Each plane had been suspended, a mechanical colossus waiting for her call sign to lift the invisible hand holding it in place. The weight of that responsibility lingered, but it was a weight she bore willingly. Understood that one day she would fly again, and routine missions might conceal extraordinary possibilities. The sky would never feel ordinary again. In the quiet moments afterward, reflected on the lessons she had learned. Patience is strength, observation is power, and discipline can be more heroic than action. Her experience had changed her perspective on her role as a pilot, as a soldier, and as someone entrusted with the lives of many. The Delta Protocol had given her authority, but her own training and judgment had ensured its success. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the desert, looked skyward, imagining the frozen jets, the silent hover of power above, and the fragile balance she had maintained. She understood the invisible threads that connect duty, skill, and responsibility, and she felt a quiet pride in having upheld them. Captain Story became a quiet legend, not one of explosions or combat victories, but one of calm, courage, and control in the face of the extraordinary. Her call sign had held the sky, paused chaos, and preserved life. In that moment, she realized that the true measure of a pilot, and of a hero, was not in the battles fought, but in the moments where restraint and vigilance shaped history without a single shot being fired. The skis were hers again, ordinary in appearance but forever transformed in meaning. And ever vigilant, would never look at routine patrols the same way again.